if I've done something, I am in a perpetual quest to do something other than that, because I think the great privilege we have as actors is to hold a mirror up to humanity in a revelatory way. I'm not really interested in doing the same thing again and again and again, because I just find us as human beings endlessly fascinating. So I don't want to be known as the guy who plays good guys or bad guys or civil rights leaders or just action or just comedy. To get to a world where the event, shall we say, when I choose to do something is what's he going to do next, that's my aspiration.
David Oyelowo.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming, you guys. Thank you.
Right? He's bringing us a little sunshine on this cloudy day. Well, that is something that you also bring to the screen. And because we are talking about acting and this being, a retrospective of your career, I do want to start at the beginning, to the moment that acting brought sunshine into your life, at the moment in which you realized that this was something that, touched your soul and that you could touch then the audience.
Wow. Well, I was born to Nigerian immigrant parents, immigrants to the UK. And as a lot of people could probably relate to who are of immigrants, the focus was academia. The focus was get a proper job that means that the sacrifices we made were worthwhile. Being an actor was not what they had in mind at all. So, acting was something, it wasn't so much that I loved acting. I loved movies. I loved TV. I was a TV addict, as my mum would often tell me. And so by the time I got to do plays at school and things like that, it was purely as a hobby. It was purely as a pastime. I wasn't one of those kids who at the age of 6, I was like, I am going to be an actor, because that had sort of been boiled out of me as something that was going to be my path. And it wasn't until, I did a play at a youth theatre at the National Theatre, which only happened because I really fancied my pastor's daughter, who worked the overhead projector. And one day, that's a lot of information I'm giving you already. But
we have 90 minutes, so.
But I was so obsessed with her that when she eventually invited me on what I thought was a date, I thought, whoa, we're going to the theatre. What I didn't realize was that she was taking me to a youth theatre at the National Theatre where they were low on boys. She was doing it purely to ingratiate herself to the director. But I liked her enough. I kept going. I was shy. I wouldn't say I'm an introvert, but I was shy enough that I wasn't someone who put myself forward. And what happened, actually, a seminal moment for me was, I guess I was always a very observant kid. So there was a day where there was a subway strike in London. The 3 boys who were being groomed to play the lead in this show all were stuck on trains. And so the director said, David, just come in and read the lines while we wait for these guys to turn up. So I'd spent months just observing these guys and I guess thinking, how would I do this? So I went up there and did it the way I thought it should be done. And I finished this speech and the room stopped. And I thought, oh no, I was so bad that everyone has just gone like that. But within 2 to 3 days, I was cast as the lead. And I guess in that moment, something was seen in me that I didn't even know I have. And I kept having these experiences whereby me plus a story plus a stage equaled people leaning in, to the point where my own mother, who couldn't care less about theatre or storytelling, came to see me in this play and said, "Oh, you are good." And so that was, you talk about sunshine. That was a moment for me where I went, It's one of the worst things about being an actor, actually. The fact that knowing you are good is very much predicated on other people's opinion. And it's one of the toughest things I think about being an actor. But when it happens, it is, as you say, sunshine.
We're already getting to the real truth here because that is the thing. And I've heard you say before this idea that has resonated for you both as an actor and as a producer, but this idea of every no kind of being that stepping stone to a yes. How did you start to like attribute that yourself? How did you start to be confident enough, both as an actor and a producer? Because as we're going to get into with many of these projects, Bass Reeves, of course, in particular, you had to fight through many slam doors, people saying no, not right now, all of those things to get to the point where we're here today celebrating this series that has been, the most watched on Paramount Plus. So how did you find that confidence in yourself to let those no's become your stepping stones to yeses?
That came with time. It certainly wasn't something I had at the beginning. Because as I say, it is one of the very challenging things about being an actor is that it's completely subjective, in terms of who thinks you did a good job or not. And so early on, you're very tender. You're very vulnerable. I remember leaving drama school after 3 years of training and, really being, one of the things and this may not be a popular thing to say, but one of the things I truly disliked about acting was auditioning. Because I feel like it's a very imperfect way to judge whether someone is right for the role. I hated going into situations where, there are 7 versions of me sat in the waiting room and now I'm sat here feeling like, I'm in a sort of meat factory. And oh my gosh, these are very thin walls. I can hear everything that's going on before I go in. And, all of those things that just heighten your insecurity, heighten your self-doubt, heighten the reason where you go, they're definitely going to get the role. I'm not going to get the role. But you muscle your way through those things. And actually where drama school really helped me is you have 3 years of, if the training does what it's supposed to do, of your teachers telling you that wasn't good. That's not the way to do that. You need to do more work. And so you're building muscle towards your ability to take not just rejection, but to build up your own sense of self. Because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. Actually, if you don't have a sense of, I am beginning to get a sense of why I'm here, what it is I bring to the table, and why I want to keep doing it. And something I say to young actors is, if it's not the only thing on the planet you want to do, don't do it. Because it has so many ways of kicking you in the teeth. But the only thing that keeps you going is you go, there's just nothing else I want to do. And what happened with time is I got enough rejection, but I had enough resilience, and then enough things that I truly believed in came to fruition. And I thought, what I was dealing with is subjective opinions. I'll never forget, there was a casting director at HBO called Carrie Fraser, who early on in my career here in Hollywood, in LA, after we moved here from the UK, I kept on getting down to the last 2, the last 3, and then I wouldn't get it. And it was very, very disheartening. And she said, no, that's the sign that you are in the right place. Because remember, there were other people who were the person who always got the job for the people you are now down to the last 2 and 3 against. And I was like, that's easy for you to say. I'm the one with 2 kids and a 3rd on the way, and I gotta make some money here. But she was right. that role came along that was the breakthrough. And, I'm sure we'll touch on some of these projects that did roundly get rejected before they were accepted. And, you just build up a muscle. Muscle is built through resistance.
What would you say is the role that was the breakthrough? Because obviously we have the role that we all see in terms of Selma and playing Dr. King. But for you, what role was the breakthrough?
It's really interesting because a film that was seminal for me in terms of a breakthrough is actually a film that almost no one has seen. It's a film called Who Do You Love, in which I played Muddy Waters, the blues singer. And it was a film that was about to come out at the same time as a film called Cadillac Records, in which Jeffrey Wright also played Muddy Waters. And so that film essentially tanked our film. But the scenes from that film went onto my showreel. And that was what Anthony Hemingway saw and got me in for Red Tails, which went on to be a seminal moment for me, getting to work on a George Lucas produced film alongside actors who were unknown at that point: Nate Parker, Leslie Odom Jr., Michael B. Jordan, Elijah Kelly. We were all no names, and George was the name, but he had been trying to get that film made for 2-3 decades. And that was a massive moment for me, getting to be in that film. But it was also the piece of tape on my showreel that Chris McQuarrie saw to cast me in Jack Reacher. And because I go in with this accent and my disposition, and Muddy Waters is not me. And I think it was the thing that those two directors saw and went, oh, he can transform. So we know he can do that. So there was a level of confidence in bringing me in for those projects. So you just never know where that breakthrough is going to come from.
And those projects are two projects that are kind of not like the David that we're used to seeing. Obviously in Red Tails, Lieutenant Little is, this hotshot flyboy, and he is a hero as well, but he's a hero that has, those hothead tendencies. Right. And in Jack Reacher, I'm not going to spoil anything, but you do some things that maybe are not so kind. Right. So I know that is something that really tends to be what you're interested in as an actor, that idea of playing these people that are not so much like you. At that time in your career, what was it that you were looking for in roles, and how has that kind of evolved as we get to a Bass Reeves?
My aspiration as an actor has always been to be as chameleonic as possible. My favorite actors, particularly Daniel Day-Lewis, there are no two characters or roles that you can go, oh, it's a bit like so-and-so. And I think there's a difference and a distinction between being a true and great actor and a movie star. And it's not to denigrate a movie star. I actually think you can be both. But by and large, if we're going to get into definitions, a great actor is someone who constantly goes to the role, and a movie star is someone who constantly brings the role to them. And so with time, what you're trading on as a movie star is that brand. And I actually like seeing them do that thing. That's what we're buying into. But when I see a Meryl Streep, or I see a Christian Bale, or I see a Daniel Day-Lewis, or I see a Viola Davis, so often what I think is transcendent about them as performers is the fact that you go, that's in the well as well. That to me is what I deeply admire. And so if I've done something, I am in a perpetual quest to do something other than that, because I think the great privilege we have as actors is to hold a mirror up to humanity in a revelatory way. And that is such a privilege. I want to go as deep far and wide as I can in the exploration of what that is. I'm not really interested in doing the same thing again and again and again, because I just find us as human beings endlessly fascinating. So I don't want to be known as the guy who plays good guys or bad guys or civil rights leaders or just action or just comedy. To get to a world where the event, shall we say, when I choose to do something is what's he going to do next? That's my aspiration.
I'm very curious about that idea because I did just revisit Red Tails in preparation for this talk. And I just really was struck by the gravitas of that kind of young performance. And the chameleonic nature did come into play that we then see in Bass Reeves, where there are moments in that where, partially because of the accent, partially because of the costuming, just feels very both unrecognizable, but also lived in the sense of like those are like morals and things that we all know you stand for. So I'm really curious about getting into the skin of Bass Reeves and what it was initially about this character that made you spend nearly a decade fighting to bring his story to the screen.
Well, we've already alluded to all the rejection and all the no's. And the reality is that as a black man trying to tell those stories, that is 10x, that is exacerbated exponentially, because in the time that I think at this point, 25-year career has been playing out, it's been in a time where still there is a lot of resistance to certain stories being told, with the excuse that they don't have reach, there isn't the audience there, they don't warrant the budget that it necessitates, the perspective is niche, and so therefore there's less money to be made. All of these excuses, which I have known deep in my soul, were based on biases that were untrue. And so my path, whether it's very early on in my career, making the decision, I heard this anecdote early on in my career, which was that Denzel Washington essentially built his career. Initially, he said to his agent, "Send me everything Harrison Ford is turning down." And I thought that is genius, because what that suggests to me is he recognized that the aperture in terms of what he is considered capable of and what there is out there by way of material this aperture is very small. For Harrison Ford, the world is truly his oyster. And so he recognized that he is a human being alongside of being a black man. And what he brings to the table is his humanity, regardless of the color of his skin. Now, that's not what clearly he was being afforded on the page. And so that's why he made that call. And so I completely understood that, because growing up in the UK, I did not see representations of people who look like me that were commensurate with my aspirations. I had to look to Sidney Poitier. I had to look to Denzel Washington. I didn't see in the UK on the ground actors who, even though I knew they were great actors, I didn't see the opportunities manifesting for them in a way that felt right. And so coming out of drama school, when I went to sign with agents, I said, I want to be sent up for roles that are written for white people. And I literally had one agent in particular who laughed at me, like audibly laughed in my face. And the excuse he gave was so stupid. He said, so what? If it's a 7-year-old white girl, I should send you up for that as well. I was like, you know what I mean. And that was the willful ignorance that you're dealing with. So I eventually signed with an agent who bought into that. And the first two major career moments for me was playing a role in a spy show called MI5, or Spooks, as it was known in the UK. And that was a role that was not race specific. and then playing the King of England at the Royal Shakespeare Company, which, you know, you could argue, thank you, in some people's opinion was race specific, but not in our production. And so those were two big moments where my aspirations were validated by opportunities tied to success. And that's the big one. You know, the challenge when you're trying to break new ground, which I guess means being groundbreaking, is that if it doesn't work, it becomes the excuse to not do it again. And it unfortunately becomes the reason why people coming behind you are not going to be afforded that opportunity. So the stakes are incredibly high. And that was something I recognized early on, even though I didn't love the fact that there was that added pressure. So that was foundational in my career. The fact that these resistances were unjust and needed to be disproved on the basis of success. And I had some examples of that early on. So I knew I wasn't crazy. And so in relation to your question about Bass Reeves, I grew up watching Westerns like a lot of kids did at my age, and never really saw myself represented in them. Blazing Saddles was like the only one. And that was a kind of a poking fun at the whole thing. It certainly didn't represent the fact that 1 in 3 cowboys was black. And people don't even know that the very phrase cowboy, was a racial epithet. They were called cowpunchers, actually. It was because there were so many black cowboys that the derogatory boy got tied to cowboy. But you would not know that to watch movies, to watch TV shows. And so as I found this out, you know, and it was in 2014 that the idea of Bass Reeves was presented to me, I became so indignant at the fact that my 6-year-old self was robbed of not seeing. I mean, if I had seen Bass Reeves on a white horse as a 6-year-old boy, my worldview would have shifted on its axis. And not only that, maybe my parents' worldview would have shifted on its axis in terms of what is possible. Because the only example of that my mom in particular saw was Sidney Poitier. Her favorite film was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But Sidney Poitier was like Halley's Comet. He was like a shining star in the sky that was unattainable for a kid growing up on a council estate in North London. So when I had experiences, and I had the Selma experience that had been rife with rejection. I'm trying not to preempt some of your questions by talking about the sheer amount of rejection I had before getting to Bass Reeves. But by the time I got to Bass Reeves, I really mean what I say about muscle is built through resistance. Anyone who's been to the gym, anyone who knows what it is to transform your body in that way, you have to plow through the pain to get to the result you're after. And once you do, it's actually a weird gift that you now go, oh, I have a secret weapon. I know how strong I am. You don't know how strong I am. And so when you tell me no, or when you resist me, greatness is built under a rock. It happens in the small hours when everyone else is asleep, and you cannot outwork me. That's just something I know of myself. And so if I am putting the work in, I know that ultimately at some point, the combination of my effort, my belief, my tenacity is going to add to something that transcends your subjective opinion. Unfortunately, that takes time at times. I'm also a person of faith. So, you know, I see several examples in the Bible where people are given a sense of what they're called to, and then it takes many years before it manifests. So that's something I live by as well. And I have found it to be true. So by the time, and don't get me wrong, there are dark nights of the soul where you just go, this isn't going to happen. I mean, Bass Reeves, we almost got shut down 4 times within the month just before we went and shot it. So that's how much resistance you're up against. But, you know, I'm built for this. You know, I have shoulders that are broader, bigger, and more held, because of some of my, notions of who I am and what I've been called to. And so for whatever reason, the average it's sort of time it takes for the things I really believe in is about 5 to 10 years. And so I don't recommend it. But it, you know, that's been part of my story.
Truly. And I do want to go back to something you said about the pressure of navigating it, because it is something that is not fair, but it is something that, you know, from that time of you being a young person playing Henry VI had to feel and experience and work through. How did you do that?
I had a formative experience in my youth. I was born in the UK to Nigerian parents, but at the age of 6, we moved back to Nigeria and lived there for 7 years. And there is something, as a Black person specifically, there is something about being in an environment where you are not a minority. There is something about being in an environment where every opportunity on offer could be, should be, and is yours for the taking. And I call it the Sidney Poitier syndrome. Sidney Poitier, what he achieved would be miraculous today. But this is playing out in the 50s and 60s, and I think it was tied to him growing up in the Caribbean, where he was part of a majority. So it is very tough to be a Black person in America. And what I mean by that is that you wake up every day knowing atmospherically, literally, politically, racially, there is a degree of resistance to who you are, what you represent, the things you bring to the table. There is an inherent resistance to it. That puts you in a fighting stance every single day. You cannot function at your optimal outside of a place of rest. A place of rest is where you can get to optimal. If you are it's why kids don't hurt themselves as much when they fall, because they're more relaxed. As you get older, as you build up distrust, you tense up, and when you fall, you injure yourself. It's why older people, when they fall, they break their hip, and before you know it, that's the downward spiral, and they're no longer with us. So to have 7 formative years where I know what it feels like in my body to be at rest with who I am, the environment I'm in, and what that means about what I'm trying to achieve was something I was able to apply to being in environments where I met with abject resistance. So I was going into rooms, places, situations, circumstances, having to intentionally go, no, I know who I am. I don't accept who you say I am and what you think I can and should do. And that's an incredibly powerful thing by way of a weapon. And it's a real shame to recognize, both growing up in the UK, because we moved back to the UK at the age of when I was 13, and then having lived in America for 17 years, both of those environments are not places that as a Black person you are able to operate from a place of rest. So that has been my superpower. You know, I grew up partly in Nigeria to a father who is from a royal family. So literally being of royal lineage, knowing that fact, being around uncles and aunties and cousins and folks who have a bearing about them that is, get out of my way. What are you talking? You know, that's literally how we move. Get out of the way. Are you with me? Or get out of the way. You know, and so that's also a superpower. And that's how I have approached this is, you with me or get out of the way. And so that's very helpful.
That's an important approach. In part because you found so many people throughout your career who are with you. and you've built this real community around you with your creative collaborators. But I want to talk about that idea of not being able to exist in this place of rest, because that is exactly what Bass Reeves explores. It's exactly the tension with which he is going into this situation, becoming one of the only and one of the first, of course, Black U.S. deputy marshals. That is his journey. He's coming, as you will see, hopefully most of you all have watched the series, but as you will see, he's coming out of slavery into this position, and we get a chance to see the full arc of how he and his family navigate this situation. So tell me a little bit about putting that truth out there and the things that he was experiencing as he's trying to wear the badge, but also feeling the weight of it as well.
Well, one of the pressures I put on myself, and I kind of wish I didn't feel this way, but it is the way I feel, is I feel called to the contextualization of the Black experience. And what I mean by that is the multifaceted nature of who we are on planet Earth, whether it be in Africa, Europe, America, or across the globe. And the fact that we are, as human beings, so much more alike than we are different, but there are nuances tied to history, tied to geography, tied to economic circumstances that lead to specificity, but there is relatability in all of it. What I loved about Bass Reeves when I dug into his story is the transcendent and indisputable nature of his arc, to go from being enslaved to being given a degree of agency and to becoming the absolute best at what he did at a time where, like Sidney Poitier, it should have been impossible. That is something anyone and everyone can aspire to. And what I don't see enough of, for me, as a Black person, is aspirational representations of Blackness. You see the browbeaten, you see the broken, you see the deprived, you see the depraved, you see the criminal, but the representations where you go, I don't care who or where or why, that is someone I want to be like. And he is someone who, despite so much resistance, so much so much being up against, was able to overcome in ways, and he did it. The thing that I truly, and I really mean this, the thing that I have come to deeply admire and be very passionate about showcasing is the transcendent and just deeply admirable nature of the African American contribution to this country. Considering what was and continues to be done to African Americans, to Black people in this country, and especially around slavery, to go through the Civil War, go into a period of Reconstruction where they were given agency enough that proved just how transcendent they were and are outside of slavery, and to choose not to take the vengeful path, but to build community, to accept this country as their country, and to choose to put it on their back and continue to lift it, having been forcibly made to do that. Where else are you going to find that? I'd love for you to show me historically where that is how it has played out. And for me, Bass Reeves is exemplary of that. The Reconstruction era was only 12 to 13 years before it was taken over by Jim Crow in order to destroy all of that Black agency. And we didn't recover for another 100 years going into probably the civil rights movement. And then they killed Martin Luther King. And I mean, are we even there yet with what's going on? I just don't know. But to go from enslavement, you are now deputized by Isaac Parker, as played by Donald Sutherland in the show, a man who is representative of the demographic that has raped, pillaged, broken, and beaten your people for centuries, suddenly the notion of what justice is has changed 180. It is no longer just to have slaves. It is no longer just for you to be treated that way, but you're still in the same environment. That's why we have Juneteenth, because there were some people for 4 years, they didn't know that this was over. And they didn't believe that this was over. It had been around for so long. It's not like now with the news and social media and everything. Like, people were like, no, there's no way that is over. So that's the environment in which you're now given a badge and you're given authority to go and arrest not just white people, but white people who are disgruntled at the fact that the Civil War happened at all. And you are now being given agency to arrest them. Can you imagine how head spinning that is for everyone involved? And yet you go on to have a 32-year career in law enforcement in that environment. That's ridiculous. So that to me is a true hero. And these events played out 150 years ago, like predating cinema. How have we not had that story showcased in this kind of way? You know, we've seen him peripherally, we've seen sort of like tangential little things. But when I first read the script of Selma, the film was about Lyndon Johnson. Dr. King was a peripheral character. When I first read that script in 2007, and it went from white director to black director, and then eventually first black female director. And each time a new director came on, the nature of that film shifted, which is where I learned perspective is key. So my perspective, again, had to be the one that was central, because I knew if it wasn't, it would get co-opted, it would be marginalized, we'd try to focus elsewhere, because everyone is entitled to their bias. That's just not how it's gonna be on this, you know, is the thing. But I had to learn all that stuff the hard way. But there's a very long answer to your question, which is that journey, those revelations, that history, because I had the deep privilege of going from Red Tails to The Help to Lincoln to The Butler, to Selma. 150 years of African-American history I was afforded entry into before now get to do Bass Reeves. So I knew the good, the bad, and the ugly of how these projects get put together, and a lot of it is ugly. And so, you know, by the time I got to Bass Reeves, it was just like, okay, we just have to do this in a slightly different way.
Well, I know you did just give me a long answer, but I have to ask you about the long journey of Bass Reeves, because this is one of the many projects that Yoruba Saxon has produced. But like you said, you read this project in 2014 and it is now 2024. Tell me about that 8-year journey before we even got to the actual shooting of it. What ended up being the key for you that kept you, actually I already know what kept you on board with it, but what was it like that first day on set after those 8 years of continuing to plow forward on this project?
I am incredibly cognizant of the fact that for me personally, and there are a lot of actors in this room, when we get to do it, ours is the greatest job in the world. It just is. You get to be a child again, get to play dress up. When you do projects of this nature, hopefully you get to say something meaningful, and you get to pay homage to who we are as human beings. And especially if you get to play someone like Bass Reeves, you get to platform and showcase someone who should have been on the tip of everyone's tongue a long time ago. But when you do it to the degree that we were able to do it. When you have I've never said this before, but I'm going to say it because I think it's fantastic. When you have $150 million to tell that story, when so many of the projects I have done, you are being given a fraction of the budget it should have because it centers Black people. When you finally, and this was the first time in my career, so I will forever be thankful to Paramount for this. It was the first time in my career that I felt like the budget, the scale, the scope was commensurate with the import of the story. And so to be on that set with hundreds of horses, these vistas, these costumes, and a lot of the main crew were people of color, that was also something to fight for. To have a situation where you go, there is so much here that is the right way to do it. I was very emotional a lot of the time is the reality. And I feel emotional now even talking about it because I still can't quite believe we did it, because I've had so many moments where, like I say, it's fine for me to sit here in my rather fabulous suit going, telling you about all the things that worked. But, you know, my wife, Jessica, is here and she's been through, and we produced the show together. She's here with 3 of our beautiful children as well. There's Asha, Zoe, and Penyo. And our 4th is at my drama school, Lambda, right now. He's studying in London to be an actor. Lord help us. But we have walked through these dark nights of the soul together. So when I say greatness is built under a rock, as an actor, you guys will know this. There are so many moments on your own, no one watching, the lines aren't going in your head, the bills are piling up, your parents just call to say, are you sure you still want to keep going, doing this thing? Then a strike gets thrown into the mix. You know, there are so many moments that you go, what am I doing? So when a moment like the first day of shooting on Bass Reeves comes along, when you found out that Morgan Freeman tried to make this for 3 decades and was resisted, the whole Morgan Freeman? What are we doing here? George Lucas was resisted for 30 years for making Red Tails. That's George Lucas. So you find yourself, for whatever reason, and I put it down to unmerited favor over my life from God, that for whatever reason I get to do that. I am very aware that this is not something I deserved. This is not, yes, I work hard, but it's anointing, it's favor, it's the intangible, and all you can do is meet that with the work, and just as an act of service. Now, okay, to those who much has been given, much will be required, and so those are the feelings you get when it every now and again it works.
I do want to talk about the work a little bit, but before we do, I do have to shout out Jessica and the incredible documentary that she directed, Becoming King. In that documentary, you see a lot of the work that went into producing and also starring as Dr. King. But I'm curious about your process in transforming into Bass Reeves. I mean, obviously, one big part of that is that accent. And I understand that accent stuck with you a lot while you were on set.
Yeah, I mean, there are some roles for me. Look, I had the deep privilege of working with Daniel Day-Lewis, my favorite actor, on Lincoln, but I also did a film called The Last King of Scotland with Forrest Whitaker. That, to me, again, was a moment of deep blessing of going to school. I don't think as an actor you ever stop learning. You shouldn't ever stop learning. And so to just watch those guys do what they did, the level of immersion, the level of sacrifice, the level of dedication, I had a front row seat to the cost of getting to play a role like that. You have to make peace with the fact that if you're going to play a role like Dr. King or Bass Reeves or Idi Amin or Lincoln, you are going to leave a piece of yourself behind. And that's the requirement. That's what you've signed up to do. It needs a level of dedication that is not what you do when you do a comedy or something else. It is different. I wouldn't apply that to everything. So people call it method. I just call it doing the work, which is that for me, there are certain roles, and there are 3 of them. It was Selma. It was a film I did called Nightingale, and it was Bass Reeves, where you just got to stay in the pocket. I mean, with this accent, with who I am, to be coming in and out is too much of a leap each time, take to take. I'm producing it as well. Like I have to find a way to remain in the pocket, because I believe film and television, whether people care to admit it or not, what you're actually dealing with is a spiritual transfer. Coming through the screen, when you feel truth, it's because there is spiritual activity going on with those actors that you are imbibing and internalizing in a way whereby you go, I believe it. And that's because as people, we emanate, like 90% of our communication is nonverbal. That's because we reverberate things that cannot just be writerly. And so in order for that to be the case, you have to stay in the pocket. You cannot be turning on and off the aura. You cannot be turning on and off the spirit. You cannot be afforded the opportunity to play a historical figure like that. For me, the contract made, and I mean this, is, and I don't mean it in a kind of woozy, Ouija boardy way. I mean that you literally do the work and hope that there is spiritual activity that the camera captures, a combination of the work, where you shoot it, the other actors. There is an alchemy that is captured by the camera. And so you have got to do the work and remain available to what's happening. Some of what we had on Bass Reeves, we shot the first episode, a lot of it on an actual plantation where there had been 80 enslaved people. It was an incredibly difficult environment to be in because you felt the spirit of these people. You felt the darkness of what had happened there. And it was a very tough place to be, but you had to allow it to hover in ways that was tantamount to the truth. My wife is here, and one of the oddest moments of my career is that she actually played my enslaver's wife in Bass Reeves. And we had a scene together where it's so interesting because I deeply love my wife. We've been married for 25 years. She's white. She's the lovely, beautiful lady in the front row here. And I only say she's white because the dynamics between us 150 years ago in Arkansas, Oklahoma, as it played out in Bass Reeves, was one whereby I couldn't look her in the eye. Being around her was a very dangerous thing as a black man because the accusation of rape was 2 seconds away. We were in close proximity in a way that was so dangerous. And in that morning, it was so weird because she's my best friend in the world. I've known her for forever, over half my life. And to be around someone you know that well and to have to push them away, not look them in the eye, accept that the dynamics that we are about to play in this scene is antithetical to the one that we live in now was costly. It was very costly. Shea Wiggum, who played George Reeves, my enslaver in it, took months to recover from the words he had to say, There's a card game in the first episode that was indicative of just how irrational racism is and how irrational what Black people were subjected to in this country. And he had to fully embody it. So I say all of that to say that our job, when it's being done at hopefully the highest level, and certainly with something like Bass Reeves or some of these other kind of projects I've done, and this happens, and I learned this in the theater actually, because in an environment like this, if I'm doing a one-man show in front of you guys, and there's all this truth I have to emanate through my body, I have to leave a piece of myself behind in order to communicate to you guys here. And I know what that feels like by way of muscle memory. And so that's why to me, some of the best actors in the world and some of my favorite actors have done stage, because you know what that feels like. And so that's just the price. And it's a price I love to pay when the right thing comes along.
It is. Acting is in all ways, it's a physical experience. It is not, you are in all ways living through and embodying those characters, as you say. And I am actually curious about the physicality of Bass Reeves as well, because this is someone that you're playing over the course of decades. What did it take for you to embody all of the younger versions of him as he is? I mean, listen, it's not all just about the horseback riding, even though those parts are fun too. But yeah, what was it that it took to kind of play his physical arc as well?
I had an experience early on at drama school. I was one of those kids. I did a lot of weightlifting when I was younger. So I was one of those guys who walked around like that. And I got a lot of self-esteem out of that. And I remember arriving at drama school and them saying to me, that's not going to work. You have to find the rest in the body. You have to find an elasticity and a relaxation in the body that means you can go from the prince to the pauper. You can go from the strong guy to the weak guy. You expand the nature of what you're able to do. I was like, I don't think so. Because the ladies love this. So it took me quite a while to let go of that. And what I recognized is that, and I really mean this, as an actor, you must be an athlete. And I don't mean as in you now have got to be Olympic level fit or anything, but your body is such a massive part of what you bring to the equation. And if you want to be able to play a myriad of roles, you better make peace with the fact that your body is in service of the role. So I didn't love having to put on 40 pounds to play Dr. King. But that's what it required. I did a film called The Butler, where I started out in my teens and went up to being in my 50s, but we are shooting out of order. And I had to do a very weird thing whereby I was going from sometimes within a week, teenage self to, but I had to do when I knew the teenage scenes were coming up, I had to get on a treadmill for 3 hours sometimes to burn the pounds to be able to play the younger self. And then I would have to eat salty food, drink a lot of water. The water clings to all of that salt and you puff out. And anyone who knows about boxing knows that, when you have to make weight and drop all this weight, and then over the next day you rehydrate, you can put on 20 pounds. I'm not saying it's for everyone, but I'm one of those crazy guys. So, but that to me, it was a 15-year span, playing Bass Reeves. One of the things I knew is that over those 6 months, I simply could not get injured. So I spent 15 months before we started shooting, not knowing if we were going to get to shoot, going, I have to be strong enough that I cannot get injured. I have to be strong enough that I can be on a horse all day, every day and be okay to shoot the next day. I had to be able to find in my body the version of him that was in his mid-20s and the version of him that was in his late 30s. That's all body work. And so, and you can't do that if you're coming into the process 20 pounds, 30 pounds overweight. Now you're going to be getting on a horse. Now you're going to convince me that you're the 20-something-year-old version of it. Like, I'm sorry for you guys who are actors and who really want to take this thing seriously. You have to go to the role. You have to go to the role. You have to sacrifice your comfort for the role if you want to be worthy of the calling. And I mean that as in, it depends on how you think of acting. I don't think any one of us is owed a role. I don't. Because there are too many talented people, too many people who want to do it. I have seen that the people who maintain a degree of success, you can't outwork them. I had the privilege, through a quirk of scheduling, to work with Daniel Day-Lewis and Tom Cruise within 24 hours. And that was because I was shooting Lincoln and Jack Reacher at the same time. And so I went from shooting with Spielberg and Daniel Day-Lewis by day, and then I had to get to Pittsburgh to shoot a car chase scene with Tom Cruise by night. And the amazing thing I learned in those 24 hours working with what I would argue is the actor's actor and the movie star's movie star, the thing they had in common, you couldn't outwork them. They will take you to the cleaners. You couldn't outwork them. And that's them already at the top of their game. And so if you're out here talking about you're going to be an actor and you're not prepared to do that, I'm sorry. You're not worthy of the calling. I really, really mean that. Because I've seen it. I've seen the people who get to do it again and again and again and again. You go, how have you been so successful? Then you work with them, you go, oh, it's not actually rocket science. Some of it is opportunity. Some of it is alchemy. But at the end of the day, the folks who stick around for a long time, you go back and look at their early career. Work. Putting in the work. Those of them who are still around, you're like, look at Anthony Hopkins. Like, are you kidding me? Like, still, you have that level of vibrancy in the work. It's because they know the price. And so, you know, with Bass Reeves, yes, there was a physical component to it and I nearly killed myself doing it. But again, look, like I think of Morgan Freeman when I'm getting to do, I'm like, I dedicate this sleepless night to Morgan Freeman. You know, like I've got to do it so that he feels like, okay, I didn't get to do it, but that guy knows the price. Do you know what I mean? And that to me is what I try to do.
He dreamed of being on that horse, wearing that badge. I do marvel at that and what it takes, the entire dedication that it takes to do it. And I guess we've kind of danced around it. So we should go back to like 2014. 2014 was a truly incredible year. We were just talking about, you know, the 2011s, 2012s. But 2014 was the year, of course, you first heard of Bass Reeves, but also that year that Selma finally got greenlit. It was also an incredibly personally trying year for you as well. When you kind of look back on, you know, as we go through all of these different timeline things, going back 10 years, you know, what is the biggest thing you've learned? Not even what's the biggest thing you've learned since 2014, but encapsulate 2014 for me and how pivotal of a year that was.
Yeah, so 2014 was the year we got to shoot Selma, but it was also the year that one of the pillars of my life, my mother, got a brain aneurysm and went into a vegetative state from which she never recovered and ended up dying 3 years after the fact. But an incredibly faithful, praying woman who I credit with so much of why Selma came to be. She prayed that thing into existence. And she had the aneurysm in March, and we started shooting in May. And I had been putting on the weight. I'd been doing all the prep. I got a text while I was driving somewhere, my dad saying, your mom is in a critical condition, having had this brain aneurysm. So I got on a plane. I had to be in London, and we were basically told that she wasn't long for this world. And so all of those that 7-year build up to finally we got the green light, we're going, like the weight just came flying off. The idea of playing Dr. King was just like, what? And we were supposed to be starting in May. And so it was, I mean, what's that quote? It was the best of times and the worst of times. That was the optimal version of that in my life. You know, that thing of leaving a piece of yourself behind, Selma is a blur to me now. When I watch it, I can barely even recognize myself. I was in such a dark place in my personal life, but also in such a creatively extraordinary place. Not because it was like fun, but because I felt what it is to be an instrument in that moment. I felt what it is to give yourself over to something and to feel guided, to feel connected to my fellow cast members, to my director, Ava DuVernay. It was the closest I have come to the transcendent nature of what we do. And then it was tied to all of this difficult stuff. The thing I learned is resilience. The thing I learned is humanity. The thing I learned is the complexity of who and what we are as human beings, not the character I was playing, Dr. King, who in many people's minds is an icon, but he was a complicated man. And we were able to show that in the film. I was dealing with very complicated emotions at the time, but also the steps towards Selma coming to fruition. The fact that Ava DuVernay is only the director of Selma because I sat next to a random guy on a plane who was watching a show that I was in on his iPad. And the reason for that is he then turned to me and said, you're an actor. I'm watching you on my iPad. I went, oh yeah, you are. You are watching me on your iPad. And he said, is it a good idea to put money into movies? I said, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, I've been sent this script called Middle of Nowhere. A lady called Ava DuVernay is going to direct it. They're asking for $50,000. I was like, let me read it. Read the script, loved the script. The only thing on the script was Middle of Nowhere by Ava DuVernay and her number. So I called her. I said, I just read your script. This is amazing. Can I be in it? She goes, you were on my list, but there's no way I thought you would want to do it, because that was a $250,000 movie. You know, I'd been doing films like Rise of the Planet of the Apes, The Butler, you know, things like that. And that's how I met Ava. And we did that film, and she went on to win Best Director at Sundance for it. And it had gone from, the first director was Stephen Frears, then it was Paul Haggis, then it was Spike Lee, then it was actually Lee Daniels who cast me in Selma, but we couldn't get the right budget to make it. And so I went to Plan B and Pathé and I said, I met the director. I've met this lady called Ava DuVernay. It has to be her. And they went, oh, well, this small little movie you did, like, really? Is that? I was like, see the movie. You know, her dad is from Lowndes County, which is between Selma and Montgomery. Like, this is the director. And that's how Ava came to direct Selma. I had, even though Lee cast me in Selma. He didn't direct Selma, but it was on the film I actually did with him called The Butler that I met Oprah. And I had told her my dream of playing Dr. King. And she said, I believe that's your calling. I believe that. And I will do anything I can to help you achieve that dream. We still couldn't get the film made because I was a no-name. Ava's a no-name. I called her up. I said, I need you as a producer on this. You're like, what? What is this thing? I said, it's the Dr. King thing. Like, I need you as a producer. And she went, okay. And that's how she came onto that project. And that's how we got the green light, for Selma. So, and then the thing that, and you talked about skirting around things, like God has been the guiding light in my career, personally. I'm not saying that that's something that is everyone's path, but I will never forget, you talked about the first day on Bass Reeves. I'll never forget the first day on Selma. I was sat in my house that I'd rented in Atlanta after the first day of shooting. And to be honest, I felt as lost as you can feel. Because this thing that I had dreamt about for so long finally came to fruition, but I couldn't call my mom. She was not my mom. She was just her body in a bed. Oprah called me and she said, how was the day? I said, yeah, it was good. It's a good first day. And we chatted about it a bit. And then she goes, okay, David, time to go to bed. So I had what I needed. And God knew that. Despite how bereft I felt, gave me what I needed in that moment to get the job done. And that's how I was reminded yet again, at the highest level of what we do, it's a calling. It is. I have been so blessed to be part of projects, Selma being one, Queen of Cartway being another, that have moved people in ways that is more than commerce, is more than box office, is more than, oh my gosh, is AI gonna ruin everything? What we do, I truly believe this, is medicine, is so essential for the human experience to be bearable. This thing of holding up a mirror, letting you know it's okay, letting you know you're not alone, letting you know that even if you're an 11-year-old girl in Idaho, white girl, there is an 11-year-old girl in Kartwe, Uganda, like you, who loves chess, that those thousands of miles, all of that difference in who you are is just geography. And what we do is important to God. What we do is important to humanity's existence. What we do is important. The pandemic was the biggest example. Imagine the pandemic without TV. Without all of those things that you finally watched and finally went, oh gosh. Okay, human beings and experience and connection and community and all of those things. So anyway, I'm sure I've veered from what you asked me, but the point I'm trying to make is that with Selma in particular, despite how devastating a time it was, the thing that I feel so blessed, and it's weird because I feel like my mum probably knew somewhere that she needed to launch me and give me enough that I could go into what went on to be a completely different phase of my life. My career was never the same again. My life was never the same again. She gave me everything I needed. Oprah gave me everything I needed. The Road gave me everything I needed. My wife gave me everything I needed. My kids gave me everything I needed. Ava gave me everything I needed. My cast gave me everything I needed. And the thing that is so amazing is you feel it in the film. When you watch the film, you go, there's something on that film. And that's the kismet, that's the alchemy, that's the beauty, I think, of what we do.
Part of the reason I love talking to you so much, David, is because you actually do always drive exactly where we need to go. So you're never not answering. You're always taking us to a place where we're really able to reflect on what all of this really means. And I know that that is something that has been part of what you've been launched into, being launched into your purpose. And you've talked about it a little bit in this idea of, leaving it open for others behind you, and also for making these projects for, the little girl out there to see this 11-year-old, chess prodigy. But part of that has been for your kids. Part of that has been for the young actors that you've cast in these projects, from The Waterman, which you directed, to, of course, we see it so well in Bass Reeves. Tell me a little bit about stepping into that purpose and being able to create these projects for those that are coming after you.
Well, as I just expressed, I am the byproduct of advocacy. Without Oprah, I don't know that I'm here doing a retrospective. Without Jill Foster, who was my theater studies teacher, who encouraged me to defy my father and go to drama school, I don't know that I'm here. Without some of those challenging experiences where I go, where am I on the big screen? Where am I on the small screen? I don't know that I have the perspective that I do. My daughter Zoe is here, and, Queen of Cartway was a film I did very specifically dedicated to my daughter because, I want her to live a life that is tied to, like I was saying about growing up in a majority environment, there is nothing you cannot do. And that film exemplified that so beautifully. And I haven't seen too many films that do that with a little Black African girl. I just can't think of too many. And so, films are incredibly powerful. It's one thing to say that to your daughter. It's another thing that when I'm no longer here and she's puts that on for her kids, and he said, that's Grandpa believed that. He believed that, which is why he made that film. I don't make things I don't believe in, is the other thing. Because I personally, I don't subscribe, and some filmmakers say this, that I shouldn't have to take responsibility for the nature of what I put out into the world. I think that is deeply irresponsible. And I don't think that is true. I do think that what we make affects culture. I do think it helps shape minds that are pliable and are open. I don't think if you celebrate sexual violence and you glamorize criminality and you put dark things into the world without the contextualization of the light, that you are doing edifying things for the audience. I truly don't. And so I hold myself accountable to the things I put out into the world. And don't get me wrong, I will play a dark character. I will be in a dark movie, but a pinprick of light is what defines darkness. Darkness doesn't define light. Light defines darkness, and it can be a pinprick. And that's all you need to go, oh, I see that. I see that. And that's what catches your attention. And that, to me, it doesn't negate that darkness is real. And so for young people, I'm constantly thinking of my 6-year-old self and what I didn't get to see. And my goal for myself is to leave the world a little bit different than I found it. And I find that, there's a reason the Obamas have a deal on Netflix, right? This is an incredibly influential medium. And if you get to have a platform, if you get to make stuff, you are shifting culture. And if shifting culture to me looks like what I didn't get to see, which is Lonnie Chavis in The Waterman, or Storm Reed in Don't Let Go, or Demi Singleton and Lonnie Chavis in Bass Reeves, if they get those opportunities that the Shia LaBeoufs and the Leo DiCaprios and all these actors who have had such a long career, like for us, if I don't have a Selma, if I don't have a role that basically Ryan Gosling fundamentally couldn't play, then there is a world in which I'm not getting that breakout like Denzel did with Malcolm X, or Jamie Foxx did with Ray Charles, or that is traditionally the way we as Black people get our breakout, is to play a role that a white person just couldn't play. So that has to change. Do you know what I mean? That shouldn't be, because to play someone important, they have to have done some stuff. So there's a reason why we don't really get to see young Morgan Freeman or young Sam Jackson because it's like they were in the theater then, because there wasn't really the opportunity. Now, that is something I can have a little hand in changing, of like finding how are we going to populate the pipeline with great actors at a young age? How are we going to populate the pipeline with production designers and music supervisors and costume designers and casting directors and composers? All of these areas that are still so anemic when it comes to representation. I was talking to our production designer, and I see someone from my show right now, Government Cheese, right here. Hi. We're going to be on set very early tomorrow. Yeah, very early.
It's actually just here to make sure you leave on time.
Yeah. Oh, I see. But I was talking to our production designer, Warren, on Government Cheese that I'm shooting right now. He's one of like 6, maybe 7 production designers that are Black, period, in the entire industry. That's crazy. Chanda Dancy, who did who's the composer for this. Like, how many Black female composers can you name? Chanda. Vonda K. Morris, who was our head of makeup on this, who I've worked with for forever. This is the first time in a 30-year career she's been afforded this scale and scope. Wynn Thomas, absolute legend, has never had a TV show of this. His first TV show. Why? Because he does movies, because he wants to do things that are elevated. He hasn't found anything of this nature in the TV space in also an over 30-year career. So when you manage to get something like this going, I really mean this about populating the pipeline. Like, the excuse that gets used time and again for not making stuff is, I know we really should have Black people as part of the equation, but there's just none of them who have done it at this scale. It's what we faced with Ava. Thankfully without Oprah, I don't know that she gets to direct Selma, because Oprah gave her cover to be like, and you know what happened? They still didn't give us enough money to make Selma. Oprah had to put in $2.5 million of her own money to get it done. That's why Bass Reeves is a miracle. Like, no one, thankfully, had to put in their money outside of Paramount. So that's the thing that I am most proud of. When you watch our show, you're going to see Lauren E. Banks, who plays my wife, who's an incredible actress, Yale graduate. You're going to see Joaquina Calocango, who's just graduated out of Juilliard. You're going to see Grantham Coleman, who's an amazingly trained actor. You're going to see Tosin Moronfola, who I found out is my cousin, which is so crazy. But also just an amazing actor. And, there's this narrative around Black British actors and them being better. That's just not fundamentally true. It's tied to opportunity and scarcity. There is such a scarcity that pits us against each other. So when someone comes along and gets the role, it's like, why them and not me? But actually, it's because we're not doing a good enough job of populating the pipeline. The British versus African American, that's not the issue. It's a scarcity issue. Like, do you think Daniel Day-Lewis, anyone is coming up to Daniel Day-Lewis going, why should you get to play Lincoln? You think Robert Downey Jr. is going up to him and like beefing with him over that? No, because he's like, I'll call Chris Nolan and we're going to do whatever we want, whenever we want. Do you know what I mean? So that's the thing that is going to change the narrative, is we have to go from scarcity to plenty. And, that also is something I'm trying to be a contributor to.
Well, you're contributing to that in all kinds of ways. Not to be counting people's pockets, but to contextualize what you're talking about with this having 150 million for this show. Selma was made for around 20?
Yeah, 22. That 2 was
the 2 was Oprah's 2.
Yeah.
So to have a budget that is, I don't do math, but 7 times. Oh, we've got another one of those perfect God numbers. Got that 7.
Yeah.
Yes, to have more than nearly 8 times, but we're gonna go with 7. 7 times the budget to have a show like this. When you now kind of look back and have watched it and heard from the audience, what has been that kind of overwhelming response, that real, feeling, that message that people have taken away from this show that means the most to you?
When I walk down the street, having done the movies and projects I've done, 9 out of 10 of the people traditionally, historically, who will approach me are Black people. Why? Because I represent them in a way that is edifying to their soul. Because we all go to the movies and watch TV to see ourselves reflected back to us. Now, as a Black person, as a person of color, a lot of the time as a woman, you're having to do that through a white male gaze. And traditionally, you're like, I'll make peace with that because that's the bulk of what I get. So when you see your actual self represented towards you, you're like, whoa, it's someone who looks like me on TV or in a film. The thing that happened with Bass Reeves that is so edifying is I have had equal measure white, Hispanic, Asian, Black recognize me or express their love for the show, which I think is to do with the expansive nature of what we were allowed to do. When you have 1/5 of the budget, 1/6 of the budget, you have to shoot into such corners, into such, the aperture shrinks. And the global mainstream audience is used to, wow, that was a big, great movie and it was a world and a thing. And the minute you have to minimize the world to just get it done, it becomes niche. It becomes, oh, that's one of their movies. It becomes a Black movie or a Black TV show. And subconsciously you're going, oh, that's small, so it's for them. But when it is just expansive, and it feels like that's just human beings and horses and family and all the things that I love regardless of who it is. That's also a way that Paramount said, no, this is for everyone. And the audience subconsciously internalizes that. That's not a Black show. That's for everyone. It's a big show. They don't do big shows with Black people in it. Do you know what I mean? And that's why Black Panther crossed over. Because it was just big, and then you suddenly have white kids running around in Black Panther outfits, like going, I'm T'Challa and whatever it is, and like T'Challa. That's what it should be. That's what it is for me as a black person. I'm running around as the Lone Ranger. I'm not thinking I'm the Black Lone Ranger. I'm just the Lone Ranger. Do you know what I mean? And so that's the thing that has been the biggest validation of this journey thus far for me, because the 10 years from the time I first was made aware of Bass Reeves to now, the narrative as to why it wasn't getting made was it's not global. It's not, it's a black man in a black, but this is the most beloved American genre. What do you mean? But all they saw was this, the black component made it niche. And you've alluded to it already. The fact that the show went on to be the most watched show globally on Paramount Plus last year is, I cannot put words to the of it all. Because it's like, no duh. Like, of course it is. It's Bass Reeves. Go to Wikipedia and just read 3 paragraphs. The world is gonna internalize that. But for so long, and I don't like using the phrase gatekeepers, but it's apt. Because if we're saying there are people who basically say, no, we're not putting that out to the audience because we're gonna paternalistically decide that they will not want to eat those fruits and vegetables. And that's what we had pre-streaming. The gatekeepers were so much better placed to hold sentry, because how do you find the data around box office and what's going on network television? It's very hard to, but we have raw data. To the person can know who watched Bass Reeves. And at the end of the day, they say they don't see color, they see green. I think you see color, but they do see green, and they do see numbers, and they do see data. And that is one of the things I'm most grateful for with streaming, is that because I don't think pre-streaming you could even use that phrase global, because how does it get to a global audience? How does what HBO used to be do a show like this and know that in the UK, in Nigeria, in Australia? I was talking to someone today who lives in Prague who was like, that show was everywhere in Prague. In Prague? Like the film that I directed, The Waterman, was #1 in Paraguay. I don't know what Paraguay is in relation to The Waterman, but 10 of the countries where The Waterman was #1 were countries I've never been and never had in my mind when I was making that film. That's incredibly powerful as a filmmaker to go, don't you be telling me this isn't global. I just did it and I'm going to do it again. Yeah. And so that is the thing that is most edifying, is that thing I said earlier about you're either with me or get out of the way. I can say that with just a little bit more pep in my step now, which is a very nice feeling.
Well, I guess where this leads us to next is what doors you're kicking down, what we're getting out of the way of. Obviously, you are working on Government Cheese right now. You're headed back to the stage for Coriolanus. But yeah, what is the next? Because hopefully the next is not 7 or 8 years away. But what is the next big heart dream that you're pursuing?
Well, the thing I've come to recognize, and thank you so much, by the way, you're all being so attentive, and I know we're having you here for the length of a feature film. Talking, thank you so much. Thank you, bless you. The thing that I've come to recognize that is still the challenge is, with everything that I've talked about, with the successes I've been able to have, the fundamental problem that still exists is that the means of dissemination of the kind of work that that fronts my bias is still traditionally and persistently having to be funneled through a white male perspective. It is still having to be funneled through distribution mechanisms that are not controlled by or owned by people of color, by women who are able to go, no, I value X, and so therefore I'm going to take a punt on that. And so myself, Nate Parker, a friend of mine, Chike Okonkwo, and Zach Tangeloff, we've started our own streaming platform called Mansa, which is an ad-supported streaming platform like Tubi, like Pluto TV, that is Black culture for a global audience. And in the year since we launched, we have over 500,000 subscribers, which with no marketing and all of that stuff is really great. And, it's small and growing, but I cannot begin to tell you how empowering it is to be able to take something I like, put it on a platform I own, and it can be in front of people like that. And that's something that several individuals, mainly white men in Hollywood, traditionally have had the power to do. And barely any women, we love you, Donna Langley. And I cannot think of any Black person who has that agency and power. And so what you are having to rely on is the kindness of strangers. What you're having to rely on, and please hear me when I say this, you're having to rely on big moments like Oscar So White, or the murder of a Black man over 8 to 9 minutes in the form of George Floyd. That means that promises are made that, to be perfectly frank, have now all been rolled back. And so it can't be 2 years of no Black, brown, or Asian person being nominated in the 20 opportunities the Academy had each year to do that for the acting categories, for that to happen 2 years in a row, for there to be change. It cannot be a Black man being murdered that happened to coincide with a pandemic, which meant that we were all watching TV at the same time, and that led to the Black Lives Matter movement, and that meant that we all felt like we should do better. It cannot be giant cultural moments like that mean we must do better, and we must, where are all the Black women directors? Who are these? Can you introduce us to them, David? And like, yes, I can. But you gotta stick with it. Do you know what I mean? It can't be like flavor of the month and then you move on. And that's the thing, I'm sorry, that you can't rely on people not to go back to their bias. So even if ultimately Mansa becomes a lighthouse of what's possible, I want to see a world where there's more of that. There's over 1 billion people on the African continent. There are stories the likes of which would blow your mind. And in a world where we're still dealing with prequels, sequels, and whatever they deem to be IP, to not have those stories blowing our minds globally is something that simply has to change. And the McKinsey report just came out again and showed just how much money is being left on the table because these biases are still in place that are not they are not malleable or dissolvable enough for them to literally do the thing that they know they should do, really. But that like supremacist thing is like, oh, it holds on to you, and it's the thing that I subconsciously, consciously, knowingly, unknowingly, willfully, or unwillingly, it's there. It's a real thing. You're not imagining it. It's a real thing. And it is something to be fought at every turn. But the short version of my answer to you is I am no longer interested in busting the door down and being let in. I think power and true change lies with building your own house, with a door, with a table, with bedrooms that you can invite people in and go, isn't it lovely? Come on in.
Well, of course, part of that house is your Ruba Saxon. As you were saying, part of that house is Mansa. And with Mansa, that is, you recently partnered with Ava DuVernay and a lot of her Array titles. And also you mentioned Nate Parker going back to our Red Tails days. So my last question to you is kind of what do you say to that 6-year-old David who would have loved to have seen a Bass Reeves, who hadn't really even dreamed of this career yet, of this life? If you were to kind of give him the retrospective of what these decades have been, what would you want him to know?
Well, this would be my shortest answer of the night. I would simply say to that little 6-year-old kid, you're welcome. I really mean that. Because boy, do I wish I had seen Selma. Maybe not as a 6-year-old, but but as a 15-year-old, boy, do I wish I'd seen Queen of Cartway. Boy, do I wish I'd seen A United Kingdom, or Bass Reeves, or The Butler. It would have changed things, I think. But I did have Sidney Poitier, and I did have Denzel, and I did have these individuals who were shining lights. You cannot be what you cannot see, is the thing. You simply cannot be what you cannot see. No one's trying to get to the moon unless it's there glaring at you every night. And you're going, what is that? And so there just need to be more moons. There need to be more stars that make people go, that one's me, and maybe I can reach it. And so that's what I have tried to do for my kids, my 6-year-old self, myself. When I tell you, driving down Sunset Boulevard and seeing yourself on a white horse rearing up, having been a 6-year-old kid doing that on your mother's broom, I cannot, and I mean this, express the feeling of going, that's amazing. And it's me.
Thank you, David, for living your dreams. And thank you for sharing with us all that it really takes to do this. We see you on that horse, and it's good to know the man behind it, not just the myth. So thank you, David Oyelowo. Thank you so much for this engaged conversation. We appreciate you so much.